What up, YouTube? It's your boy the Visionary. Welcome to another episode of Fireside Chats. This is gonna be a regular episode. I haven't put one of these up in ages. This is kind of a in-depth elaboration on the Preludes episode I put up just recently. The Preludes basically talked about three topics that were in current events: the death of Hugo Chavez, and on the previous one, Karzahs claims that the U.S. is controlling Al-Qaeda. And I thought those two separate topics that were part of current events deserved another show in and of itself to explain some of the things that I guess from a civilian perspective have been going on in the world today in dealing with Hugo Chavez's death in Venezuela and its history in the international community and with the United States, and Karzah's claims of the U.S. controlling Al-Qaeda. We're going to start off with Hugo Chavez. Now, we all know he died recently, and after his death, there was like a big outcry that, oh, he was like a great leader, yada, yada, yada. For most people who don't know, he was a socialist leader, and the country is socialist. Basically, all of the revenue and money that a lot of the businesses over there own, they actually invested into the country. Like, they invested into the education, they invested into the poor, social security, stuff like that. Chavez himself, I think recently, with the past couple of years, he was trying to create a retirement, like a social security retirement system, because they didn't have it over there, where anyone from any economic strata within the country in itself was taken care of once they get to a certain age. Basically retirement. Pretty much the U.S. or the Western powers themselves, basically the United States, Britain, France, and anyone who's part of that coalition, disliked Chavez because him, along with other South American countries, had their own little socialist / organized bloc that stood against Western imperialism, because that's basically what it was. So I find it kind of strange that he's died, and if no one's noticed that all these countries that have been a problem for the U.S. in general and for the international community, or aka NATO, have died. Like, literally, if you go back, I know I've talked about this in depth before, probably in my other videos, where the report in 1996, the PNAC report, the Project for a New American Century, is a very important and very vital piece of information that people should read in understanding what were the real underlying reasons for why we went to war in Iraq and why we are in war, technically World War III, in the Middle East. Because that's basically what it is. It's World War III, but it's not publicized as such, in and of itself. But yeah, that's basically what Chavez was. He was basically a pain and a thorn in the Western power side, and he needed to be removed. You know what I mean? Because one of the things that a lot of people don't understand about foreign policy, it's more or less not about protecting yourself physically, but it's more about protecting your interest. And a big interest to the United States and other Western powers is basically resources. In fact, that's a basic interest to everyone all over the world. If you're talking about the military. And one of the things that they never talk about in public to the common man is the importance of oil in industrial societies. Now, the thing was that in, I think, early 2000, 2001, before, after September 11th, but before we went to war with Iraq and then moving on to Afghanistan, the major issue was that, before September 11th, right? Before that happened, Saddam Hussein, which, understandably we actually put him in power, due to an accounting mix-up, basically said, I'm going to switch my currency, the currency that I buy and sell my oil in, to euros. The United States didn't like this, and as well as other Western powers didn't like this, and that was one of the major causes for going to war against Saddam Hussein. We cooked up that bullshit story about, oh, you know what, this guy has weapons of mass destruction, yada, yada, yada. We go to war, and it's swept under the rug, because it's currently, everyone knows it's bullshit, but no one's doing anything about it. These people who created this false war, they're not being put in prison. They're not in jail at all. They're still in power, and they still hold seats of authority, period. So we go to war with Iraq, and then it spills into Afghanistan because this was on purpose. The reason why is because in the 1996 report, the PNAC report, there were literally 7 to 8 countries within the Middle East who were major oil producing states who had a lot of geopolitical pull in those regions, and the major plan was to topple each one of those regimes in those specific countries. The countries that we're in right now, like Iraq, Afghanistan, we're dealing with Syria right now. We've toppled Libya. Iran is one of the big countries that we're trying to kick up a shitstorm with. We have a beef with. Those are the same states, the same countries that we've had beef with before. That's in PNAC. And one of the actual states, one of the major geopolitical pivots in the region, actually in South America, was Venezuela. Why? Because Hugo Chavez was the head of the OPEC Union, and the OPEC Union is basically the oil producing countries of the world. These were the major exporters of oil. And what happened was, in order to combat Western imperialism in its encroachment on their resources, they all banded together. Most of them, Brazil, Venezuela, Peru, all these countries that have major exporters in oil, basically said, we're going to create an organization that bands together to give us better, bargaining rights and geopolitical power in the region, so on and so forth. But in and of itself, the organization was basically headed by Chavez. So Chavez was the head of this organization, and he was the face of basically South American independence and prosperity and so on and so forth. And his application of socialist policies were being used to bring up the country. The West did not like that. Why? Because think about it this way: what happens if his ideology spreads around the world? If socialism in and of itself becomes the norm and capitalism starts falling out of view, what happens is people in the West, America, Britain, the UK, or whatever, start to lose their power. Because once people who have a monopoly on resources start to lose their sway on those resources, then they start to lose power, period. And they couldn't have that. I find it magically convenient that he just randomly dies out of everything. He just dies. He just gets sick, and then he dies. On the eve of what's going on in the Middle East and what's going on in the world in general. We are in a massive push to take over everything. Like, that's what's going on, and most people don't realize what the hell is happening, period. Moving on to the second topic I want to talk about. This one, it's kind of like it's my own personal analysis on what the aftermath of the Afghan war. Basically, the way I see it, as Karzai, he did his little press conference, and he basically came out and said, listen, the U.S. is basically has been colluding with Al Qaeda to like disrupt and topple our government and this and that and yada yada yada. So there's two ways you look at this, right? The first way is the alternative media perspective. The conspiracy theory perspective is basically saying, I told you so. You know what I mean? Like, it's like all these guys who have been on the conspiracy fringe or the alternative media or conspiracy fringe have been saying this for decades. You know what I mean? Like, if you know history, if you've been studying it, if you understand geopolitical history or foreign policy for the past like 40 to 50 years, you understand what Al Qaeda and the Taliban were. Al Qaeda was basically created by the United States, the CIA, headed by Brzezinski, as a way of creating a movement to combat the Russian encroachment on Afghanistan and Pakistani borders, basically. So during the Afghan-Russian war, Brzezinski went down there and he played proxy, because that's basically what it is. Because most people don't understand that we were still in the Cold War. That's basically what the Cold War was. Basically, Cold War is not actual direct military conflict. What happens is when one country or one whatever decides to go to war with another place, what happens is they use proxies. Now, a proxy can be any other country or whatever who is an ally or who is friendly or favorable to the host or the mother country in and of itself. So what happens is when the proxy country or force gets into a conflict or war with another country, what happens is the opposing country is usually funded, or they're usually given weapons and ammunition or supplies by a country who has beef with the other side's mother country, pretty much. So if you're looking at the Afghan-Russian war, Russia directly was involved in that conflict because they were trying to get into Afghanistan to get their fucking oil. The U.S. said, okay, listen, we're not going to directly intervene, but we're going to start training some of their people. We're going to actually start training the leaders so they can actually create their own movement, and that's how the actual radical Islamic movement was created. And Brzezinski himself even said it in his own books that he published. I have one of them on myself where he actually said, listen, when he was having a conversation with the people at the time about, radical Islam can spread and it might be a threat to the West, and Brzezinski says, no, you don't understand its purpose. I will use radical Islam to crush Russia. And that was his purpose, because what he wanted to do was create a movement in the Middle East that would spread to other countries. And what happens is that movement would start pushing Russia and, in some cases, China back to their borders. So once that happens, the only thing that's left is for either Russia to directly confront the movement themselves in regards to the countries that they're in, or go back and forth in battle between China, because Russia has a lot of resources that China needs. That's the ultimate game plan. You fast forward to what's going on today, and Al-Qaeda, in and of itself, the organization, the movement, has now become the United States' ultimate foreign policy skeleton key. It's its ultimate geostrategic skeleton key. What we do is we give them aid, we point our finger to a government, they magically find themselves in some government, and they set up shop, they cause conflict, they destabilize the region, and then the U.S. moves in to stabilize the region, period. Once we get there, we set up base, and that's it. This has been going on for the past 10 years. This is the formula. If you pay attention to what the fuck is happening, first it was Iraq. We said, he had weapons of mass destruction, and he has ties to Al-Qaeda. We're going to go into Iraq. We went into Iraq, and then we did it with Afghanistan. Iraq got toppled, Afghanistan got toppled, and I think Karzahs is the president of Afghanistan. So we put him in to hold down power. And then you go to Libya, same shit. Libya, the Libyan president himself, what is his name? Muammar Gaddafi himself, he was a philosopher king. He was a philosopher king. He actually took the money that his country was making and invested into the country. He improved education. He improved the waterways, the agriculture. He improved a lot of things in the country. He did something he wasn't supposed to do, which was introduce a new type of currency based on gold. The West didn't like that, and he had to go. And that's basically what happened. You look at what's going on in Syria right now. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get Assad off the throne. He's been holding it down for the past year or two and whatnot. And it's the same plan. What happens? There's Al-Qaeda. There are rebels and there are Al-Qaeda in that country. We find out that the Al-Qaeda forces are actually good. Let's give them some arms, and they topple the government. And then we go in to say, listen, we're not going to allow you to take control. Yada, yada, yada. They're trying to do it in Africa. Africa is now the next major theater of war. Like, it's the next stage. Africa has a lot of fucking resources. And more importantly, it's a major pivot in geostrategic foreign policy. And what that means is that Africa itself is very important to other global powers, and specifically China, because China does a lot of business with Africa. And China in and of itself, if you be paying attention to the current events in the media, the name China has been implanted. It's being implanted in the public discourse, the public consciousness. So now the next big bad boogeyman is now China. So you're gonna hear in the newspapers, you're gonna hear on news, you're gonna hear in intellectual discourse between politicians and analysts the name China. Look what China's doing here. Look what China's doing there. Blah 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 blah. You're gonna keep hearing it, that their name being brought up. You're not hearing a lot about what's happening in Russia, because I think Russia has been, you know what I mean, pushed down. We have Russia on lock, but China's the next big threat. And it's something to follow. So when we go back to Karzai, he makes this statement. He directly comes out and he says, you know what? The U.S. is in cahoots, and they're colluding, and they're controlling Al-Qaeda, and they're using Al-Qaeda to destabilize the region, and yada yada yada. Now, I told you the conspiracy aspect of this, but here's the geopolitical aspect of this. this happened during the Afghan-Russian war. I forgot the president at the time, but he said the exact same thing. And what happens is when you have a certain situation where a war or a conflict is coming to an end, and you have the invading forces leaving on a certain timetable, what happens is political figures usually stand up and start, rattling their swords to make it seem like, oh, see, we kicked the foreign invaders out. What happens is, when you have a person who does that, they're generally trying to do it to save face with his people, number one. Number two, he's trying to build up political support from the people, just in case he wants to run for office again. And I find it kind of odd that magically, as we're leaving, he starts saying this, and he goes, oh, the U.S., get out, imperial, blah, 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 but, and then it's like, you didn't do anything. Like, we're leaving by contract. You didn't negotiate anything. We fucked your country up, you know what I mean? Respectfully saying that, you know what I mean? Like, we fucked your country up, we killed a whole bunch of your fucking citizens, what are you gonna do about it? Why are you even, like, standing up and saying that? So I guess he's doing it to save face, in the public eye and in the international community, to say, listen, we don't agree with the West and what they're doing, and yada yada yada. It's an interesting thing to see. I remember running into an old friend of mine, and he is an old dude, like kind of like a mentor guy. He told me something funny, and I wrote it down as part of dialogue in my book that I'm writing, on my fictional book. And the concept, what he said was, whenever you're dealing with politics and you're looking at the public office and who's in it, if the motherfucker isn't getting death threats and he's not dead after a year or two of being in office, then he's part of the conspiracy. He's part of the motherfuckers that are fucking shit up. You know what I mean? He's just as bad as the tyrants in other parts of the country. So don't trust the motherfucker. But if the motherfucker's dead, or if he's getting death threats, he's a cool cat. You know what I mean? He's actually trying to do something right. Notice how all these Middle Eastern and South American leaders are getting knocked off. I remember a friend of mine was telling me that he has a friend that's in Africa. He's an African nationalist, and he said the leader of the African state got murdered. He just had a heart attack and died. And it's amazing that all these leaders are dying, whose countries are not in direct conflict with the West or in a war. They're starting to die off of shit like, yo, you have the best Medicare. How are you dying off of like a heart problem or a cold or something? That's how these people are dying. Period. Like, they're dying off of regular dumb shit. Like, surprisingly. Yeah, keep your eyes out for it. That's it for this episode of Fireside Chats. I'm going to keep you updated. I'm going to have another Fireside Chat preludes probably up within a day or so, because there's a lot of interesting shit that's happening in Africa in and of itself, and I think it's relevant because it's going to affect what's going on over here. That's it. Deuces.